After spending over 6 weeks in Croatia, we continued south along the Dalmatian Coast to the country of Montenegro, the second smallest of the former Yugoslav republics, about the size of the state of Connecticut, with 1/5 of the population. The bus ride from Dubrovnik to Kotor is scheduled for 2.5 hours, but the traffic at the border crossing turned it into a 5-hour slog. The final stretch around the Bay of Kotor is very scenic, passing along the coast dotted with little towns that are dwarfed by the dramatic massifs of the Dinaric Alps rising immediately from the water. The water near the shoreline is also speckled with markers of commercial shellfishing. However, after 5 hours in the bus, one uniquely vexing part of the ride was passing by the narrowest part of the bay. You can see the other side of the shore less than 350 meters away, and you wonder why there's no bridge. It added 11 kilometers and 30 minutes to an already long ride, and it isolates the nearest airport from the north side of the bay. As of 2019, there are still no firm plans to span this gap. Most of the town of Kotor itself is, like the other towns along the bay, squeezed between the mountains and the water. The things that stand out immediately are the ancient stone fortifications climbing along the mountainside. The top of St. John's Peak has been fortified since pre-Roman Illyrian times. Byzantine Emperor Justinian I reconstructed the fortress in the 6th century. The Venetians, who conquered the area in the early 15th century, expanded the network of walls and other fortifications to their final extent. This includes the 15th century Church of Our Lady of Remedy that looks down on the town from halfway up the mountain. Totaling 4.5 kilometers in length, the walls were twice besieged by the Ottomans in the 16th and 17th centuries, once by the British in 1814, and damaged thrice by earthquakes in 1563, 1667, and 1979. Our Sobe apartment was right on the water, a short walk around the port from Old Town Kotor, with great views any time of the day. Daniela and her husband Mirko were amazing hosts, and we couldn't recommend them more highly. Residential areas of Kotor stretch south into the valley, and some buildings are in disrepair, but in terms of what we needed on a daily basis, everything was close to the water and to Old Town, and in good shape. Old Town itself is surrounded by the high, thick walls of the Venetian era. Two main gates provide entry. Inside the walls, Old Town is bustling with activity most of the day and night. Bars, restaurants, live music, and shopping are abundant. There's even some aerial art, including this bronze set of drawing laundry. Reflecting the area's religious history, there are both Catholic and Orthodox churches, though Orthodoxy is predominant today. As with Croatia, there are places to stay in Old Town, and there's no worry about access to fresh drinking water. If there are walls to be climbed, we will climb them, or at least we will try, and the walls of Kotor were too enticing to pass up. They can be accessed from either side of Old Town, and both routes lead to the first main destination, the Church of Our Lady of Remedy. The path up was pretty rugged, even with the stone steps. We got a late start, and the temperature quickly climbed over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Once the sun cleared the mountains, there was very little shade, and the hike got pretty brutal. But once we could see above the terracotta roofs of Old Town, we knew we'd made the right call. This wasn't something that we could miss. Avic opted to stay and wait at the church, which offered some pretty good vistas of Old Town and the bay, but, of course, I wanted to see how far up I could go. Farther up, I got more of a feel for the state of the fortifications. Some had been well restored, but many still showed the centuries of damage. Annoyingly, despite the many trash bins along the way, there was way too much modern trash. It's one price of tourism, I suppose. The next and final landmark that I reached is called the Ladder of Kotor, stairs named for the steep incline. The name was well deserved. It really felt like a ladder going up and going back down. The steep climb was totally worth it though. Views like this are truly the reward. Sadly, even though I was powered by a couple cans of orange sugary goodness and I could see the fortress just above me, I couldn't make it all the way to the top. Discretion being the better part of valor, I swallowed my pride and we headed back down to hike another day. One overcast morning, we started out from the port on a boat tour of the bay. Once we got well away from shore, we were able to look back at Lovchen, the black mountain that gave Montenegro its name. As we approach the narrowest part of the bay, you can really appreciate how close the two shorelines are. Moving on through the central part of the bay, before we passed through the next narrow stretch, we made our first stop of the tour. The tunnel, dug into the limestone hillside, used to house Yugoslav submarines after World War II and into the Cold War years. Apparently, there are a series of these tunnels running down the Dalmatian coast, all now used only to amaze tourists. Some say that Hitler and Mussolini built the first of them during the fascist occupation, but regardless of who built them, they are definitely impressive to be inside. Moving on out of the tunnel and back towards the mouth of the bay, we passed by 3 round 19th century towers that guard the entrance. The central and southern ones are in Montenegro, and the distant northern one is on the peninsula controlled by Croatia. Once used as an island concentration camp by Hitler and Mussolini, the central tower is now, eerily, being developed into a luxury commercial resort. Having passed the mouth of the bay, we headed toward our next destination, the so-called Blue Cave, where we were supposed to go swimming. Impressive and interesting, but too small for so many boats. So we moved on to a nearby spot where the water was just as ridiculously clear and refreshing. Avic also joined the fun, and the waterproof GoPro came in handy. Heading back through the bay and the Narrows, we came upon the final stop of the tour. One of two islets that we had seen from the bus on the way to Kotor. Our Lady of the Rocks was once just a small outcropping. According to legend, two sailors saw an icon of Mary and the baby Jesus there in 1452. From then on, every time sailors returned successfully from the sea, they added more rocks to the pile. Eventually, the islet was large enough to support an Orthodox shrine. The Venetians replaced that with a Catholic shrine in 1630, and the current church was built in 1722. The second, natural island, houses an abandoned 12th century Benedictine monastery. The oldest paved road in Montenegro runs from Kotor up and around Lubchen Mountain to the old capital of Cetinje. Originally built between 1879 and 1881, it's one of the most famous scenic roads in the world. A newer road branches off and takes you higher up Lubchen to the national park. The whole drive reminds me of the fun drives through West Virginia, especially the tight switchbacks, and even though it was a hazy day, the views of Kotor and the bay are spectacular. The national park is best known for the mountaintop mausoleum of Prince, Bishop, and Poet Petar II of House Petrović-Njegoš, who was the secular and religious head of Montenegro in the mid-19th century. The Petrović-Njegoš family are the historic and current monarchs of modern Montenegro after regaining independence from Istanbul in 1696. 77-year-old Crown Prince Nikola still holds a symbolic position in the government. The site was originally dedicated to Petar II's uncle, Petar I, a Serbian Orthodox saint and the most revered of the Petrović-Njegoš family. But because the younger Petar was an early proponent of a united Yugoslavia, he was more of a 20th century national symbol. The mausoleum, designed by famous Croatian sculptor Ivan Meštrović, was built by the Yugoslav government in 1971. For our final dinner in Kotor, we took a taxi 30 minutes up the coast to the restaurant of Stari Mlini. The name means old mill, and from the year 1670, it was a flour mill. 40 years ago, the property was converted to a restaurant, and it's much more of an entire evening experience than just the fine dining. You can walk around the property at your leisure, with the mountains looming above you, past the fish pens that are connected to the water of the bay. You can also arrive by boat and dock at the private harbor. A small bridge crosses the Ljuta River, where they also chill watermelons, to another part of the property that we visited after dinner. Our table was right by the mill wheel, which provided the perfect traditional setting. For dinner, we had pre-ordered traditional Sach slow-cooked octopus. It was one of the most expensive items on the menu, but it was fantastic. After dinner, we walked over the river where you could see some of the local shellfish traps, relax a bit in their swings, but not for long as it's a popular Instagram spot, and take in the sunset over the hills. Our final morning in Kotor, we took a taxi 90 minutes in easy traffic down the coast to the town of Bar to catch a train to Serbia. Along the way, we passed a seaside resort town of Budva. Known as the Miami of Montenegro, the population of 20,000 can quadruple in the summer. Two of its most famous residences are the hilltop Dukli Hotel, where a July stay will run $1,000 a night, and the slightly more affordable island of Aman Sveti Stefan at $6,000 per week. Budva is not on our list of places to return to. Much more interesting to us, the village of Petrovac, population under 2,000, has dramatic terrain, long beaches, and an island chapel to visit. Bar itself is an active industrial and cruise port. 3 ships were docked there the morning that we arrived. The Orthodox Church was beautiful, especially in the morning sun, but the train station itself, not so much. The markets across the street were closed before we departed, but at least the adjacent cafe was open. The train itself, once a pride of Yugoslavia, was covered in graffiti and very run down. The dilapidated seats were painfully uncomfortable over a long train ride. The bathrooms were so bad, we didn't even want to photograph them. The Belgrade to Bar route, opened in 1976, has a reputation for spectacular scenery, which is why we chose this over flying. Shortly after leaving Bar, we crossed over Lake Kotor that straddles Montenegro and Albania. Near the other side, we passed the 18th century Fort Lisandro, built by Petar II as a defense against attacks from the Ottoman Empire. After the lake, we passed through the capital city of Podgorica, the largest city and home to almost 1/3 of the national population. Maintenance suffered from severe underfunding and war damage in the 1990s, which has resulted in the railway becoming unsafe at normal speeds. In 2006, a train derailed, killing 47 passengers and injuring 180 more. Since then, speeds have been lowered, turning an 8-hour trip into 12 or more hours. Efforts are being made to repair the lines, but they are slow in coming. As we got farther from the city, the scenery did greatly improve. River gorges and roadway bridges that spanned the river valley but bypassed ancient villages dominated much of the landscape. One landmark we were really looking forward to is the Mala Rijeka Bridge, the highest railway bridge in the world from 1973 to 2001, when it was surpassed by the Beipan River Bridge in Guizhou, China. After crossing the bridge, the mountains got much more rugged, reminding us of some of the mountain passes we'd been through in Colorado, albeit at a much lower altitude and still below tree line. Coming down from the mountains into the Tapa River Valley, we passed through Kolishin, our first town for almost 3 hours since leaving Podgorica. Moving on, we passed through some foothills until we came to our final stop in Montenegro, the town of Bijelo Polje, a town known for Lježnica, hazelnuts. The town and surrounding municipality also have the highest population of Muslims in Montenegro, 46% versus 18% for the country overall. There are 4 mosques in the town and another 6 throughout the municipality. After stopping for a straightforward passport check, we were off again towards the Montenegrin-Serbian border. We hope that you enjoyed our explorations of Montenegro. If you did, and want to see more from us, please help us out with the YouTube algorithm and hit like on the video, subscribe on our channel, and feel free to share. Hvala vam.